What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Magic the Gathering video. And we are going to be looking at something interesting that I found in the banned and restricted article that we got yesterday, talking about the changes, or rather lack thereof changes, to all the major formats. And I don't think to anybody that should really be a surprise. They weren't going to change anything in the middle of RCQ season for Pioneer. It's going to probably be saved until after the season's over in mid-July, according to the article. Modern's going to have a Pro Tour coming up, and Standard has rotation coming soon. So all the major formats, at least in the competitive sense, are going to have no changes. You know, Legacy, apparently Modern Horizons 3 is supposed to impact Legacy pretty hugely. So I guess we're just gonna live in a metagame that has 25% Reanimator and like 3% everything else. But you know, overall, it's probably for the most part, it's a good thing. You know, again, the fact that we have kind of some major events going up, some major things still happening, that we're gonna wait until later on in August at some point before we get another ban list that will hopefully impact some of the other formats. And quite frankly, I don't think that we really need to impact the formats that greatly, although there's going to be some things that they're going to keep an eye on, which is kind of what we're going to talk about in this video. But of course, before we get too deep into the subject of today's video, if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos from me, where I post a lot of Modern and Pioneer content along with other longer form videos. So if any of that interests you, again, please consider subscribing and ring the notification bell so you know those videos get posted. Free, easy way to support me and my content as we try to get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I think we're on a pretty good roll, so I think it's super doable, and I appreciate any and all support that I have gotten and will get in the future. So with that said, let's go ahead and talk about Amalia combo. This isn't going to be like a deck tech or anything. We'll kind of go over some of the basics of the deck, so then that way, you know, people that maybe aren't very familiar with it kind of know what's going on. But in the article that we got from Wizards, it said that while Pioneer has been a mixed bag of results, and all the macro archetypes, you know, aggro, control, mid-range, and combo, have all have at least one or two decks that are viable in the format, and I can kind of agree with that. That Amalia is kind of getting an eye kept on it for the fact that it ends up drawing games, and that's no fun. And it also starts to be very confusing with players that have never played in games before that end in draws that don't just happen at the end of the round. And you know, we'll go over some of the ways that happens and can happen if you're the one playing the Amalia deck, playing against it, what have you. But you know, the deck has been very popular. I would assume that this would be a non-issue if it had like a lot smaller of a metagame share. But again, we'll kind of get all into that once we kind of look at the deck and everything, and we kind of talk about exactly what is going on. But, you know, overall, you know, I think that while having a creature combo deck is a very positive thing to begin with, and the fact that this deck does kind of, you know, have like a 2, 3, 4 cards that it has to assemble to actually be able to win the game, I can understand, you know, wanting at the very least to, you know, see what happens and how the format progresses through the rest of the RCQ season before potentially making any changes to the format. So let's go ahead and take a look at the deck and kind of figure out what they're talking about here in this article, and kind of have a nice discussion of the Amalia combo deck. So let's go ahead and take a look at our deck list here. So here is the Amalia combo deck. We'll kind of sort everything out here once we kind of explain exactly what's going on here. So with this deck, if you know you haven't seen it before, you don't know what people are really talking about, you know, the deck is based around the card, the namesake card, Amalia. So Amalia Benavides Aguirre is a white and a black for a 2/2 ward, pay 3 life, and whenever you gain life, Amalia explores, and then you destroy all other creatures' power is exactly 20. You pair it with a card called Wildgrowth Walker, where if whenever a creature you control explores, you put a +1/+1 counter on Wildgrowth Walker, and you gain 3 life. So as long as you have both Wildgrowth Walker and Amalia on the battlefield, if you have a way to gain life or explore, one will then trigger the other, which means that we kind of go through this loop until Amalia eventually reaches 20 power, destroys all the creatures, and while in that case destroying Wildgrowth Walker, meaning that the loop stops and you're able to kind of proceed as normal. You'll have at least a 20 power Amalia, depending on how many life gain triggers that you had and whatnot. And essentially you can then like win the game. Like this deck can win on turn 3 a few different ways. A lot of the time, you know, you play like a Lunarch Veteran on 1, in Prosperous Innkeeper, which both gain you a life whenever another creature enters the battlefield. So this is kind of like a way that you can generate some incremental advantage with a card like Amalia, where you can just play this like on turn 2, you get to explore, potentially hit your 3rd land drop. If you already have the combo rolled up in hand, then you're going to have more than enough mana to be able to do so. Or just find other spells and stuff to maybe try to kind of kick things going, like getting another Wild Growth Walker, looking for something like a Selfless Savior to protect your Amalia, and things like that. Then the deck has a few different ways it can win past attacking with Amalia. In the very early iterations of the deck, this was like your only way to win, and you were just playing cards like Return to the Ranks and whatnot to basically just reestablish the combo and force your opponent to interact with the Amalia all over again. But this deck, has went through its own evolution, and this has kind of been the thing that it's done for a while. So one of the win conditions is Aether Flux Reservoir, 4-mana artifact. Whenever you cast a spell, you gain a life for each spell you cast this turn. You pay 50 life, deals 50 damage to any target. You're not going to play this card and then end up casting so many spells that you're going to be able to kill your opponent naturally through that. I mean, I'm sure that maybe, quite possibly, there is some world where you could potentially do that, but most, I would say 99.9% of the time, you're playing this card because you've kind of established your combo and you're essentially looking for an Aether Flux Reservoir to win the game. There's also Dina Soul Steeper, which is another fair piece, I would say, to the Amalia deck, where you could just play a bunch of little life gain creatures like Lunarch Veteran and Prosperous Innkeeper, and then just play creatures. Then you end up with Amalia exploring so many times, you end up getting a fairly big creature. And with Dina, you're just able to kind of slowly drain your opponent. So it says whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. You can also pay 1, sacrifice another creature, and it gets +X+O, where X is the sacrifice creature's power. This is also another way, if you have a big Amalia, you can attack essentially with 2 of them. If you attack with Dina as well, because your opponent's going to have to block the Amalia or block the Dina, and if either of them go unblocked, then they can just end up dealing 20 plus points of damage, which more than likely can end the game. This deck also plays very well as a mid-range deck, being very grindy. You have 3 Collected Company in this list, 4 Court of Calling to kind of get either specific creatures or just try to spike 2 creatures off the top of your library, so in that way your Court of Calling can go get the potential missing card, whether it's Wild Growth Walker, Amalia, Dina, Innkeeper, or Lunarch, what have you. You have 2 Extraction Specialists that can enter the battlefield, get something back that costs 2 or less. Aside from the Sentinel, the Nameless City, and the other Extraction Specialists, all of your creatures are 2 or less, so you're going to be able to get back Innkeepers, Wild Growth Walkers, Amalias, what have you. And if you get back an Amalia with an Extraction Specialist, and you're able to kind of continue your combo and whatever, eventually it'll destroy all the creatures, destroying the Specialist, meaning that Amalia can then attack or block, and it'll be kind of freed from the Specialist. So I mean, overall, this deck is pretty crazy. We see this card Lively Durge, that is from the Outlaws of Thunder Junction set, which can return up to 2 creature cards with total mana value 4 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Conveniently, your combo, or at least most of your combo, is 2 mana cards, so you're going to be able to get 2 creatures back a lot of the time, or you can get something like a Specialist and a Synod Scout, and then a Specialist can go and get something like a Wild Growth Walker. You could stack them in a way to where you can kind of get these back and generate a ton of value from Lively Dirge. And this is actually a great addition, and you can even pay an extra mana, so 5 mana total, to search your library for a card, put it into your graveyard. So if you haven't seen any of these, you can just go and tutor it up for 5 mana, put it into your graveyard, and then return it to the battlefield. So really neat, a lot of cool stuff that's going on here, and this is kind of typical of what you'd see from some creature combo decks, where there's just backup plans among backup plans. There's so much consistency that the deck offers you that it does make it very powerful. So that's kind of what's going on, and I know I said I wasn't going to make it a deck tech, and I guess I kind of did, but the principle, I guess, is still the same. So how does this deck draw? Because in the article it said that Amalia does produce draws, and it is very infuriating. And if you're the person playing the deck, especially on Magic Online, you have to essentially mill your whole deck. Your opponent gets to see your entire list or what's left of your deck before you're able to get the game to recognize that as a draw. And paper, it's just recognized as a draw. And you just go on and play game 2 where weird things happen, because honestly it's even confusing to me, where I'm not like quite sure off the top of my head how necessarily it plays out when you have a draw in game one. But I digress. So the things that can happen if your opponent gives Wild Growth Walker indestructible, or even if you give Wild Growth Walker indestructible thanks to Selfless Savior, unless there's a Dina in play, you're just going to constantly gain life, then explore, gain life, explore, until, again, on Magic Online, you just mill your whole deck, or, in paper, you just end up, conceding the game, or not even really conceding the game, but, just playing a new game in sideboards. You can also... really, I mean, that's really the main thing. Like, as long as Amalia, if you put a pump spell on Amalia, you can get it past 20 power and it'll just keep going. If you're able to, basically, if you're able to hiccup them on like their power and stuff like that, it gets pretty rough. A lot of decks here from time to time have been playing a little bit slower, where they don't necessarily need to go for it like on turn 3, so they can leave up like a Court of Calling for a Dina, or be able to leave a Dina in play so that when they do go for it, they can just combo, and like even though they might be able to give the Wild Growth Walker indestructible, they're still going to lose 1 life throughout this loop and eventually just end up dying to the Dina. And I guess that's pretty bad for the format. It's overall, it does create some very confusing situations in Magic, especially and kind of infuriating as well, because like the Amalia deck can essentially win game 1, and as long as it is put into a position to like win game 2, your opponent continues to like draw the game, and again, like shuffling, doing your sideboarding, and having to play out those games that then result in essentially no results. Gets to a point where like, okay, you could play 4 or 5 games and you won 1 and you draw on the other 3, and then you end up drawing the 4th one because of time on the round and like this deck plays very grindy. It can obviously win the game seemingly out of nowhere, thanks to having access to Court of Calling, collected companies, and whatnot. Even like Return to the Ranks as well, even though it's a 1-of in this deck, something that you can like look for if you're like looping through with like Amalia to again kind of set up another position where, okay, now you get back Dina and you're going to be able to gain a ton of life and be able to drain your opponent. This deck is like a pretty well-oiled machine at this point, and I think is not necessarily complicated. I think as long as you know what's going on and understand like the few win conditions and stuff, and maybe prepared for some of the other like 1 or 2 off cards that are in the main deck. Like we see Deep Cavern Bat here, Extraction Specialist, with these cards having lifelink, they're gonna like synergize well with Amalia being able to gain life and help you kind of with like that slow grindy plan with like Dina and things like that. Just overall, the deck is very consistent. It is very powerful. It has a great Phoenix matchup. I mean, I've played in a Pioneer tournament where I mulliganed to 4 or 5 as the Amalia deck and still almost won that game. Like it like very much like my Phoenix opponent had to draw very, very well to beat a 5-card hand from this deck. And even like when I've had like very middling hands where like I can keep this and I just have resources and I'm waiting for 1 piece essentially, and like those games were like fairly easy against the deck full of removal. The Rakdos Vampires deck, you can like, sure, like if you blow up a lot of creatures, they're going to get a lot of like Vein Ripper triggers, but when you're essentially gaining 75-80 life, there's not very many triggers that can go on the stack that will then end up killing you, to where then you can't kill your opponent with like Aetherflux Reservoir or Amalia just like attacking to like lower their life total, and then Aetherflux Reservoir to absolutely blow them out of the game. And this deck is my baby. I play a lot of Yawgmoth in Modern. I absolutely love creature combo decks. I think it's the most fun version of combo is just playing with creatures. And while it would be pretty unfortunate for them to get rid of the main creature combo deck of the format, I could also understand why. Drawing games is not fun. I don't know if there's like enough from like the major archetypes in the format, where we see a lot of like Nibdelite, Mono Green, Is It Phoenix, and Rakdos. You can argue that just the potential for drawn games in a tournament as a whole, is something that can happen, and is not something that you want to have happen. But in the end, the metagame will probably adjust fine to Amalia. I kind of hope that this deck is legal up until the at least the regional championship, so I can play some version of this deck, because again, I absolutely love these creature mid-range strategies. And that's the Amalia combo deck. That's kind of what the article is like referring to, kind of how the deck works and whatnot. If you're made it to this far in the video, first off, thank you very much. Second, if you have any thoughts, opinions, ideas of this deck, or anything to discuss, I want to have like an open dialogue with, the people that comment on like my YouTube videos and stuff. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, whatever about the Amalia combo deck, I will feel free to at least discuss them in the comments of the video. Let me know your feelings and things like that. And let's try to close out Pioneer on a high note, as basically now we're getting into like RC prep time for Pioneer. But that'll be next week. We have the Modern Horizons 3 Pro Tour that is going to be going on this weekend, so we're going to be kind of full force into Modern, trying to figure out like the metagames, check out the breakdown, things like that, and some expectations that we have for the format. So if that's something that interests you, subscribe, ring notification bell, you'll know when those videos get posted, and I appreciate any and all the support. And that's gonna do it for me this video. Hope you all enjoyed, and I hope to see you all in the next one.